Hot news now, but in Bloemfontein this time, and judgment has been reserved in the case involving 8 people accused of siphoning millions of rand from the Estina Dairy Farm project. The group appeared in the Bloemfontein Magistrate's court earlier on various charges, including fraud, theft and contravening the Public Finance Management Act. ENCA's Aaron Bates was in court and joins us now from Bloemfontein. And so, Aaron, you know, it's amazing how something that seems so simple, whether or not to postpone a case, can lead to rigorous debate in court. And that was the case today, wasn't it? Why does the state want a postponement?
So the state is arguing that it needs to continue further investigations, and it's chiefly around getting information from 2 other countries. So the judicial systems in the United Arab Emirates, of course the capital being Dubai, which people will know well if they've been following Gupta-linked business matters, and then India, where the family is originally from. And so the state has detailed, but not in too much detail, which is exactly the issue for the magistrate, what steps it's taken to try and get that information, saying it needs more time. And it's done what it can. It hasn't been sitting on its hands, but it simply isn't ready to forge ahead at this stage.
Yeah, and that argument that the state has done all it can, the arrests were made in February, if I'm not mistaken, on Valentine's Day, coincidentally. The state has said that they've not been sitting on their hands. What exactly have they been doing that shows that, you know, grant us this postponement because we're still busy investigating? It's not like we are sitting on our hands and doing nothing.
Exactly the question that Magistrate Colin Nkosi put to the lawyer for the state several times, saying, you're not answering in enough detail, you haven't given me an itinerary, was how the magistrate put it, of what you've achieved over the last 6 months. But Advocate Bakamela for the state saying they have, for example, over 300 bank statements, and that they have over 100 sworn statements, something which the head of the Hawks mentioned in Parliament earlier this week, and that they need to now go through that and do forensic auditing of those bank statements in their investigation. But what's come up for counsel, or the advocate for some of the accused in this matter, is that there is no prima facie case, he argues, against the accused, and that they were, on his version, arrested preemptively, him even suggesting, alluding that there may have been ulterior motives for those arrests you've described to us in February of this year, and that the case should be struck from the roll. It should be thrown out altogether because he says the state has blustered in 2 other linked cases and that it simply doesn't have a leg to stand on.
Pie in the sky, I think, was a word that came up in the arguments for the accused. And the state sits with a particular problem, don't they, Aaron, in that the facts and perhaps some of the evidence that they base this particular criminal matter on have been subject of another matter that is served before the High Court in Bloemfontein, where things didn't go as planned for the state, right?
Not at all. In that case, 250 million rands worth of Gupta-linked assets were sent or released back to the various parties they were changed or taken from because the court found that on the evidence before it at the time, this is the High Court in Bloemfontein, there were not reasonable grounds to believe that there would be successful prosecution in the case which was before the regional court today. And you spoke there to us of pie in the sky. That was in relation to a point from the state's lawyer that the accused were initially arrested on the worry that they were a flight risk. But Advocate Mike Helens for some of the accused saying, but they have subsequently been allowed to fly. Varun Gupta, for example, traveling to India twice. We know in May he gained a relaxation of his bail conditions in order to go to India for a Hindu pilgrimage. Other accused in this matter have also been able to travel overseas. And so him saying this whole argument about the flight risk is pie in the sky, to quote Mike Helens, because they've been able to fly subsequently. And Tulas, I must say, you know, you characterized in your introduction the absolutely blistering nature of the arguments in court today from several of the advocates and attorneys for these accused who face charges of money laundering, corruption, fraud, contravening the Prevention of Organized Crime Act. It was like watching wrestling, the state being slammed, being head-butted. It was absolutely brutal. And I don't say that with any relish. I must say I say that with some heartbreak, because we're talking about the National Prosecuting Authority, which instated this case, which has been a showpiece of the fight against what's become known as state capture. And yet I stand here before you at the end of today's arguments, not certain that the magistrate is going to be able to grant the state's request for a postponement of up to 6 months.
Let's talk a bit about the aesthetics and how it all played out in court, Erin, and particularly because the characters that were part of the drama in court today are some of the characters we all know from the national scene. People such as Nazim Hawa, who is the former CEO of Oak Bay, and people such as Varun Gupta, who traveled to India to that Hindu temple that he wanted to attend a ceremony at, and also people like Ashu Chawla, who was the CEO of Sahara Computers. What were they like in court? How did they interact?
Yes, interesting to us that there are also 3 former senior officials within the Department of Agriculture in the Free State. Sylvia Dlamini, for example, who was in the Department of Agriculture and moved, interestingly, to the Department of Mineral Resources. And if you look at what's at play here and some of the parties involved, I would argue that's no coincidence. She spoke about her job being in jeopardy in the Department of Mineral Resources because of this case. Nazim Hawa, for example, through his counsel, saying that his reputation has been damaged severely through the media coverage of this, and his prospects of future employment in the media space have been compromised by this ongoing litigation. But in terms of the dynamic between the different parties, Nazim Hawa actually sat aside from the other accused. The Free State officials were sort of in a cluster together, and then some of those Gupta company associates together, Chalwa, Varun Gupta and Ronika Raghavan. They then all moved before the court, stood up and then sat down for a long day of deliberations, arguing for their case that the matter should be struck from the roll.
So finally then, Erin, at this point we don't know whether or not the state will get the 3 to 6 months postponement they are seeking. What is the arrangement now? When are we back in court to find out the answer to that question from the magistrate Nongos?
So the magistrate has reserved judgment until Tuesday. He's going to deliberate over this matter. We did have the NPA spokesperson in the Free State, Paladi Shuping, committing that if they get this postponement, they will be ready to rumble, as it were, come the end of that postponement. But we're going to have to wait and see what the verdict is on this as of Tuesday morning.
All right, thank you so much for that. ENCA's Erin Bates out in Bloemfontein there, following that court case that has to do with the Estina Dairy Farm project and some of the 8 accused that have appeared before the magistrates' court in that city.